We come up to the last session, like you asked, and the next speaker is Amelia Rowe from RMIT Training. She's the database coordinator at RMIT Publishing. Amelia is responsible for the daily data flow and quality assurance of the Informant databases. Yep. With a qualification in information and knowledge management, Amelia enjoys working in the environment which contributes to the knowledge base. Thank you.
I wanted to come and speak today about the data flow. So this is what goes on, I suppose, in the back end to bring the data, the information into the Ex Libris knowledge base, into your Primo knowledge base to begin with. How does it get there? And it's very much I suppose, my understanding of it, and I'm coming from RMIT Publishing, so we host all the Informant databases. So I can use those. I'm going to be using those as an example of how this data flows. But I'm sure it's very similar for other publishers getting their information into the Ex Libris knowledge base as well. I guess I'll just run off a few key terms I'm going to be using when I'm talking, so that you know what I'm talking about when I say content provider. Content provider in this case I'm using as people providing their data to Ex Libris. So this can be anything from the publishers themselves to aggregators of content such as Informant. And then other key terms, Universal Discovery Service, or also used as Library Discovery Services such as Ex Libris. And when publishers are talking about this process, this data flow from publisher to the Universal Discovery Service, we often use the word syndication. And syndication means sharing data to engage and promote a common interest. And we like to think that that common interest for all of us, from publisher to Universal Discovery Service to librarian, is actually our users. So they're the ones out there trying to search and to find this information. And as an aggregator of content, Informant, we feel we have information users might want. So, and Ex Libris presents a way of helping users to find that information, which is why librarians set up Primo and things like that at their libraries, so that the user can then come in and find that information and get directed to the source of that information. So that gives you an idea what the general data flow actually is there. It goes, the resource is published, often by the publisher themselves, and then it finds its way to be indexed, because let's face it, it needs to be indexed before it can actually be findable online at all. So it gets indexed, and that makes it available, generally wide for people to find, but it's not always very findable, because sometimes even when you've got something sitting there in a database, someone has to come to the database and search that to be able to find it. So what we then do is we syndicate our metadata, we deliver it to places like Ex Libris, so that it can then appear on their databases or into their knowledge base. But before it can even appear on their knowledge base, they have to process it. And there's things like the normalization and a lot of the things that we've actually been talking about already today. So there's a lot done to actually make that data compatible with the data that's coming in from other publishers, because not all of us have the same data structures and tag formats and things like that. So they've actually got a lot of work to do just to make it visible on their knowledge base. And then obviously the user comes along and finds it. So that's a quick rundown. And what I want to do is step back a bit on that metadata flow and look at where things go differently from the usual day-to-day processes. So the usual day-to-day processes are the publishing, indexing, available on a database, and look at the metadata delivery process. And this is where things are different from usual. So what, say, Informant does, for example, is we provide an XML file to Ex Libris, which provides them with an update of any of our records that are new from the last week or month, depending on the resource that we're syndicating, or anything that's changed. So if there's a record that is changed, it gets resent to Ex Libris. That's the one thing that we send to them. The second thing that we send to them is our titles or holdings metadata. And this is for the article linker SFX. So this and the reason we send two different things is because they're used for two different purposes. The metadata allows you to search for the articles in their knowledge base. And a good way of thinking about this is how it's different from something like federated searching. Federated searching allows the user to type in their query and then have that query sent to the native database. So they'd type in the query at the library end and then be sent to Informant, for example, where the query is run and then the results sent back. Now, I think a lot of people are moving away from federated searching because it's time consuming, it's a load on systems and things like that, whereas what Ex Libris do is they actually have their own knowledge base and they get publishers such as Informant or aggregators such as Informant to provide them with the metadata. And what that allows Ex Libris to do is to host their own knowledge base, which the user then comes and searches that knowledge base. It's much quicker and allows Ex Libris to combine or process records into a more standardized format, which makes, I think, a lot of searching easier for users. It helps them retrieve more like records, allows them to do a lot of their faceting and various improvements they can do to the searching capability to make searching across different databases and across different record structures easier, which is, and then the other thing that we do is with the titles and holdings metadata. And this goes into the article linker to help you identify what information we have once you find a record, because the record you find in the knowledge base might not necessarily be coming from our databases. It might be coming from someone else who happens to also have the same resource. So what the article linker does is it looks at your holdings information, so your subscriptions, and it knows what you've got access to and what your user can access. And it pops up and it says, it's available in Informant, it's available maybe in EBSCO or something like that. And the user can choose which one they want to go to. So what we're supplying Ex Libris with at that point is the information on what titles we have and what coverage we have for those titles. And that allows Ex Libris to link a user from any record to wherever it might come from. So it doesn't matter if it's our record or someone else's record. The important thing is the user is finding how to access that. And then obviously the key point with the article linker is then it can take the user back to that source material. So it takes them back to the PDF file in the Informant databases, for example. I was going to talk a little bit more about maybe the metadata processing that goes on behind there, but I think actually a fair amount's already been covered today because we've had a fair amount of talking about normalization and facets and things like that. So I think we've actually got a pretty good idea of how it works. But I think if you want an idea of why it's important, this processing stage is important, is that not only do various content providers provide their data to someone like Ex Libris in a lot of different formats, but a lot of those formats can be sort of simplified and matched together much more easier. And I think the subject field is a great example. Some people might be using subject LCs, some people might be using mesh subject headings. Informant now recently moved to fast subject headings. So you can, if you were to map these each to their different subject types, you'd have, at least a dozen different subject types appearing to a user who's looking at this record. And given that I think a lot of users are undergraduates or something like that, they might not understand the difference between these different subject heading types. And it becomes, in many ways, harder for them to use and harder for them to search. So by breaking up the subject headings into their facets, they're simplifying it, which makes it more searchable, more findable, and it also helps them to link similar records together more easily, and also obviously helps them with their deduping. So if Informant's providing a record and EBSCO's providing a record to exactly the same article, it's got exactly the same title, same abstract, same author, and all that other information, you don't want to see two records that are exactly the same. Yeah, and I think I'll just move quickly on to I suppose one of the main things that I like to look at when I'm talking about this, and this is actually the risks and problems that are currently being faced with these systems. And obviously the main one that you find is that because this is actually a rather long sort of chain that the metadata is going to, it's going publisher, indexing, content provider, Ex Libris, processing, user, and then sometimes back to us with the article linker. It becomes like a chain of Chinese whispers, and anything goes wrong anywhere along the way, and suddenly you've got a problem back at the start. And I think some key problems that you get are, I think you've all touched on sort of deleting records. I mean, if we delete a record, say, on the informant databases, maybe it was an incorrect record or it's a blank record, we delete it. We've then got to create a file for Ex Libris so that they know to delete it, so that it then gets deleted off your systems as well. So it becomes a longer chain to clean things up. But, and same with errors and corrections. Corrections can take a little while to get to you. The linking, so SFX links, can be a big problem. They actually can break very easily. A wrong ISSN, for example, if informant has maybe used the EISSN for a record, but someone else is using the print ISSN for a record, and those two records have been merged because they are essentially exactly the same record, which ISSN is the article linker using? And if the article linker is using a different ISSN to the one in informant, you won't get a link. So there's a lot of things here that can go wrong and can break, but I think the benefits do outweigh the problems. With, say, an article linker, for example, the benefit is that predominantly these links are much more flexible than what a standard link is. They allow for something like your easy proxy to be added to them, which is something that, you know, in format, when we generate our links, we can't provide directly. And also, obviously, an article linker can find that resource in multiple places. And I suppose if you want to sort of stop and say, well, okay, these are some of the problems and limitations we're having at the moment, what's being done to try and help overcome these? And I think there's a stronger move in this sort of area of sort of universal discovery services at the moment, and I think people are getting more and more on board with it. And not just librarians and not just the universal discovery services, but publishers are slowly waking up to it. And I think you're going to start to see a lot more standardization. And the reason I think that is because that standardization helps you overcome a lot of these problems. If we're all providing our title metadata in the same ways, you get less errors being picked up. If we were all to supply our metadata in the same format, it would be less processing. For someone like Ex Libris, it's less likely that maybe a metadata tag might get mapped to the wrong place, but I've never seen that happen. So, and on that note, there was actually a recent report by the NISO on, it was called ODI Survey Report, Reflections and Perspectives on Discovery Services, which actually was just a survey they've done last year, talking to librarians, content providers, and universal discovery services about their experiences with the UDSs. And one of the things they found was that librarians are very, very big on it, and that they're becoming more and more used, more and more people are getting on board, that the article linking is probably where the biggest problems are coming up, and that content providers are probably the least engaged in this area. But obviously I'm looking forward to when they actually send out their recommendations, hopefully later this year, to see if that standardization point is actually covered in it. So yeah, obviously I'm hoping for some questions that I can... I was hoping someone was going to butt in on me there while I was talking and give me some guidance on if there's anything along this lines that you want to hear more about.
Well, you make the point of the links break, and we have that. I mean, that's probably the bane that we have one guy doing that job essentially full time. Just links that are for all sorts of reasons, they're using different ISSNs and this and that.
Yeah.
And you're saying that is being worked on because it's like at the publisher end where the problem
Yeah,
is.
yeah. Well, it's one little change, such as a publisher changes their ISSN, and suddenly maybe the publisher themselves decide to apply that same ISSN retrospectively to all their collections. Not necessarily something that librarians would approve of, but the publishers themselves, if they're doing that, then you want to try and reflect what they're doing to their resources. So you change your resources, but if somewhere along the way there's one record that still holds that old ISSN, that can, I suppose, contaminate all those other records. And it's really, I think, almost trying to get the communication going between everyone involved in this supply chain. As I said, it's like Chinese whispers. If it doesn't make it past one of those sort of passes, it won't get all the way there. Yeah.
Well, you need an ISSNC reference.
I mean, is it because the publishers don't really care? Because you think that they want people to read and find their stuff.
I think there's a lot of different reasons. I mean, I think I'm the only publisher. I'm the only publisher sort of here today, or only person from a publishing area. And I think a lot of publishers are under-engaged in this area. Some don't realise how big universal discovery services are in terms of their usage, and how much people actually think that they're a really great thing. Some are worried about copyright, so they don't even have their resources available. I think you get that in particular with a lot of law-based journals and things aren't yet on a lot of discovery services because they're afraid of that it's going to impact their copyright in some way. And some of them just don't have the resources to provide their metadata in an appropriate format to get it onto the universal discovery services. So there's a lot of different things that impact on a publisher's ability to do this. But I certainly think engagement and their understanding of the area and their knowledge of it is one of the big things.
So when you were talking about some of that standardisation, would you be looking at something around the Onyx or EPUB frameworks to try to get that the publishers to all sort of be doing the same thing?
That would be that would be good, but yeah, definitely wishful thinking. I know even in Informat, a lot of our databases have different record structures. So even we're supplying, the different resources that we supply, we're supplying some of them in different formats, and you certainly look and go, oh, it'd be lovely to be able to supply that in a single format. But the resources involved in mapping such large databases to a new universal format is obviously quite large. But you certainly need someone to make that step in, say, recommending standardization and presenting the benefits of it for anyone to even start doing the work.
So within a group like the RMIT publishing, do you have a person who does liaison with the universal resources?
At this stage, that's me.
So your people who look after your database program alert you to a change that you'll pass on, because you said there's that time lapse between things in the knowledge base, and then they have to update up.
Yeah.
But there's a whole cycle.
Yeah.
So
at the moment we send, at the moment, we try to let them know when we can. At the moment we send out sort of the new data, so the new resources that we've got on, for our collections, it's on a weekly basis, because for us they're updated daily, but we send it on a weekly basis to Ex Libris because they obviously need time to process it. So sending it daily is a bit much. And for our plus text items, it's sent monthly because that reflects the update cycle of those databases because they're updated monthly. But for any deletions, we send a text file to Ex Libris, and that's generated the day those deletions are made. And often as not, I'll also send an email to them to say, oh, just so you know, there is a deletion file there. So we're trying to engage as much as possible. And I think that's certainly what's needed to make these things run as smoothly as possible.
To address the broken link issue, I'm not sure if it would would be applicable, but do you think it might be useful to use a persistent kind of linking service?
Like a handle.
Yeah, something like a handle.
Like
So
a
you would,
DRI.
or probably, well, I don't know, there's a lot of policies around DRI and we actually have to adhere to them. But yeah, maybe handle, because you actually have to, you can actually implement a handle service within the institution.
Yeah.
At least the referencing records would always have the same link,
Yeah.
and that link could result in any sort of location.
The
Yeah.
problem is that there's a lot of content out there, like hard copy content that's got citations in print. So the volume of data that's already out there, when you bring in a new method, you can't just wave your magic wand and say suddenly it's in all the historical records and print content that's already in existence.
That's a big challenge.
So you need a way to handle the content that's out there, like obsolete ISSNs, incorrect ISSNs that got out that everybody's using, they think referred to something, but it doesn't. But now that they're using it, you have to keep that. So it's like you need a synonym database for all historical stuff. You can't just say, today the method is this, and what was out there before stops working.
Yeah. I think also one of the other issues with linking, which I mentioned, was actually authenticating the user so that when they reach that content, they can actually access it, because so many databases are subscription databases that the user needs to go through their library in order to reach, so that they get that authorization to actually access that article. It's one thing being able to reach the article, it's another to actually download that PDF and read it. Any comments and suggestions, maybe?
Informant, you do Informant TV as well? Is that you guys? Or
Yeah.
I mean, at the moment, Swinburne also hosts a lot of videos and that type of stuff, and they're moving all their content using a Cultura and so they're not going to have Flash videos, they're going to just use, Informant TV uses Flash, and that doesn't work on like iPhones and that type of stuff. Do you know if there's going to be any changes to Informant TV?
I'm not sure at this stage. I know they are looking into different media formats, but when that eventuates is always another question. Yeah. All right. Thank you.